This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. In this episode, we'll be speaking to independent investigative journalist Ali Winston, and he's going to be speaking about the Boogaloo cop killers. Now, if you don't already know, we have done an episode about the Boogaloo boys, the right-wing extremist libertarian disconnected, decentralized movement in the US, so definitely check that out. But if you can't be bothered, essentially the Boogaloos are, as I said, a right-wing libertarian kind of anti-state extremist faction within radical politics in the US. Two of them killed 2 police officers. Ali's going to be talking all about it. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. So Ali, we're going to be speaking about the Boogaloo boys, right? But specifically guys that actually did what a lot of Boogaloos say they want to do. They killed a cop. Tell us about this. When did all this happen?
Yeah, so earlier this year in the summer, right around late May, when the George Floyd protests were just ripping through the country, there was an incredibly visceral reaction to this man's murder. 8 minutes of him just having the life pressed out of him by this cop's neck. There was an enormous reaction through the country, and there were protests from coast to coast. Very, very, very chaotic in some cases. They got quite violent. In Minnesota, in particular, where the murder happened, there were these massive crowds. There were these scenes of, the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis got torched, got lit on fire. But there were at the Minnesota rallies. I don't know if people remember this at this point, but there were shots fired, like quite a few shots fired at police during those evenings.
That only came out later, right?
It only came out, well, watching at the time in the kind of the fog of war. On social media, you could see there were reports of shots fired those nights. There were also reports that night of the igloo flag being flown and of people running around with skull masks on. There was a lot of chatter about, the white supremacists are here, which at the same time you can realize how, given the past few years, people would mistake the skull mask or would associate the skull mask with groups like Adam Waffen and other far right groups that came out of Iron March. What came out is that. Maybe a few weeks ago, late October, the Bureau unveiled charges against Ivan Harrison Hunter, who's a 26-year-old from Texas, who drove up to Minneapolis with an AR-15 with an AK-47 variant, and let off about a little bit more than a dozen rounds at the Minnesota police department's buildings, and he also apparently helped torch that facility, the 3rd precinct. So yeah, I mean, this is a very, very revealing indictment. There was kind of this, the Boogaloo group organized on Facebook, which is kind of remarkable given how, how open that system is, and just how
fucking boomer book for the feds. You know what I mean?
Boomer book. But this is the irony, because this is a 26-year-old, right? This is somebody who fits into the same category, the same age group as like the dudes from Adam Waffen on the base that you and I, and Sonic Creek Division that you and I dug into with our colleagues over the past few years, who would use Discord, who would bounce back and forth between Discord, Wire, Utopia. I don't even remember all the platforms. But, these guys were all over the place. The interesting thing, though, is that the indictment for Hunter really opened things up in terms of the networking that these Boogaloo boys were doing online, and the coordination they were doing between the apparent coordination between their actions around different states that at the time looked very disparate. So let's back up a little bit and go back.
Yeah, let's talk about that in a minute. Let's go back to what they actually did first, right? Like, what was happening? It was all it was a very big hoo-ha. They went out to kill, right?
They went out to shoot at cops. And the reason why I want to step back and just go back to California is that there's another guy named Sergeant Stephen Carrillo, an Air Force sergeant who is currently charged with killing a federal court officer and a Santa Cruz County Sheriff's deputy in a spree that spanned late May and early June. He killed the court officer in Oakland and shot the Santa Cruz Sheriff's deputy to death in Santa Cruz about a week or so later when the cops rolled up on him and tried to take him into custody. Carrillo was according to the indictment that was unveiled in late October in Minnesota, Carrillo was in direct communication with Hunter. Direct communication. So 2 hours after the 3rd Precinct was torched, Hunter texted Carrillo. So they were in communication off Facebook, and then they had each other's phones, right? And they're encouraging him to do that, right? So this is on the night of the 27th? The same day that the precinct is torched, right? Hunter texts Carrillo, go for police buildings, right? And Carrillo texts him back, I did better, LOL.
Meaning I've killed a cop.
He had conducted this drive-by shooting on the federal courthouse in downtown Oakland, where he used a modified, basically a submachine gun, 9mm firing, rifle that was modified to fire 9mm rounds at fully auto, and we'll come to this later, at the guard post outside the courthouse. He killed David Underwood and wounded another court officer. So yeah, he'd done it. Like, he was bragging about it. And the feds now have this stuff.
Let's talk about who these guys are. Like, who actually is Hunter and Carrillo?
So Carrillo is an interesting guy. He is, and this is something that I wrote up for you and Popular Front a couple of months ago. Carrillo is an Air Force sergeant. He was he was based out of Fort Travis near Sacramento, and he served as part of a force protection team that would basically go in ahead of logistics landings and clear sites. They would secure sites. So he was part of a little bit of a rapid response team. They had quote unquote anti-terrorism training, but that could mean anything. But he had a bit of a checkered history. His wife, who was also, I believe she was also in the Air Force, she killed herself a few years earlier. And they had 2 kids. The grandparents were not on good terms with Carrillo and alleged that he drove her to suicide. There's probably a backstory.
It's very controlling, allegedly, right?
Yeah, there's a backstory there that may or may not come out. By the way, the discovery in his case is massive, like tens of thousands of files, incredibly large, maybe a couple terabytes of information. There's going to be a lot that comes out, both his cases, both state and federal. But Carrillo also had developed I'm not certain where, but he developed a pretty militant libertarian ideology, Second Amendment freak, really into kind of the militia movement. He was training with a militia out of Turlock, California, called the Second Grizzly Scouts or something like that. And they weren't involved in his attack, but he certainly was engaging in this sort of paramilitary activity while he was an active duty Air Force member, living on base and serving in the the United States military. So yeah, that's who he is. And in terms of Hunter, he claims, and this is all from the indictment that was presented, he claimed that he was a, quote, leader of the Boogaloo Boys in South Texas, that he'd driven up with a couple other guys from his, quote unquote, fire team, and that, quote, the BLM protesters in Minneapolis loved me because they were there to push back against the police and respond to police violence, to live fire from the police with live fire. He was also, he was the sort of guy who referred to himself as a, quote, terrorist. He knew what he was doing. He said, I'm going to go down shooting to a confidential informant. It's quite remarkable. He was arrested. He went back to Texas. He was arrested months later, but they seem to have worked back off of the devices that Stephen Carrillo had to catch up with Hunter.
Right, and I just want to kind of say for any listeners here that didn't hear our Boogaloo episode, there's a lot of misinformation. Frankly, I don't want to sound like conspiracy hoo-ha, but there's quite a lot of knowingly wrong information put out by liberal reporters who know that they're reporting in a wrong way on what the Boogaloos are. Now, I don't love the Boogaloos. I don't give a shit about the Boogaloos, but I do care about what they actually are. So it's not a centralized movement. The idea, like you just said, this guy claims he's a Boogaloo leader. That just means he's a leader of his specific group wherever he is. There's many different ideologies within the Boogaloo, and generally they're just kind of anti-police, like libertarian but American right-wing libertarian, not as we know it Europeans, but right-wing libertarian American extremists, right? Now, in that category, there are some that are far right and fascists and racist, but they are the minority from what I've seen. There was a lot, or maybe at least not the minority, but they're like a fringe element to it. But there were, because a lot of people saying, well, how come the Boogaloos were hanging out with BLM? Well, because a lot of them are not racist, or at least if they are, they're hiding it well, and they're just saying, like, we hate the cops too. I mean, you've seen on the Boogaloo flag, Breonna Taylor is on there, George Floyd was put on there, Michael Hastings randomly was on there, the journalist. But to point out, like, how interesting this ideology is, and how I think it's really a sign of the times. You know what I'm saying, Ali?
Yeah, no, it is an anti-state ideology, and there are tons of different components to it, but they are not a siege group. They are not a neo-fascist group that seeks to overthrow the government with a white ethno-state. It's a lot more varied than that, and it's not to say that there aren't elements of the organization, as you mentioned, that are aligned with Trump, or that are frankly, like, straight up neo-Nazis or fascists, but to cast them in one category as one thing is facile. It's the same thing as calling the Proud Boys white supremacists, which is facile and plays into their messaging because they have Black and Latino members as well. They are ultranationalists. They are hard right. They are, in some senses, neo-fascists. But, you know, the distinctions matter here, and that's one of the hard things about reporting on this world, in this sphere in the United States, because the distinction, fascist is not a term. Fascist, authoritarian, ultranationalist, these are terms that have currency in Europe and are linked to very discrete political movements and tendencies. Like, that doesn't quite translate to the U.S. in terms of the way that our political our public discourse happens.
Yeah, I've noticed.
It's a very strange, rough dynamic.
I mean, Carrillo's not white, right?
No, Carrillo's Latino. And there are other Boogs who have been interviewed. I mean, there have been a number of documentaries about them now. You can see there's Latinos in that sphere. There's Black folk in that sphere. But the interesting thing here is that they are not. It is a horizontal group. If anything, I would say it's more along the lines of affinity groups that share a common ideology and a common cause. But the difference here is that these folks are uniting around. It's a kind of this gun culture. You can't touch my guns. The state is involved in tyranny. Any sort of repression on that is trigger for violence. They are using all these new technologies that have been developed in recent years to get around gun control laws to help each other arm up and pose a significant challenge to law enforcement and the state. And here's where what happened last week is so critical. So on November 4th, the Bureau announced the arrest of Timothy John Watson in Lansing, West Virginia. According to the criminal complaint, he was selling firearms parts without a license. He ran a website called portablewallhanger.com, which, quote, purports to sell 3D printed innocuous hooks made with two pieces. However, when disassembled, one of the pieces functions as an illegal drop into auto-sear, which has been confirmed by ATF to convert a semi-automatic AR-15 into a fully automatic machine gun. That's directly from the complaint. He was selling switches, and Stephen Carrillo bought one of those switches.
So he was already prepared, essentially.
He bought this switch. So this guy, Watson, was advertising his portable wall hanger on Boogaloo Boy related Facebook groups and other online forums. And, this is that he was, donating money from this, according to the complaint, he was donating money from the purchases to the, quote, Duncan Lemp Memorial Fund, which is a bit of a tell, as you know better than I do. Duncan Lemp is a big reference for, he's one of the folks who the Boogaloos consider their one of their martyrs. His name is all over their flags and so forth.
Yeah, something similar. I mean, I don't want to say similar, but same kind of idea of what happened to like Breonna Taylor. Like police, I don't know, shot him through a door or some bullshit. Like basically a guy that was seemingly, in the Boogaloo eyes, unjustly killed by the cops.
Yes. And his quote, what is it? I became unreasonable. I believe that's Duncan. That's a Duncan Lemp quote. That's one of the referential quotes that the Boogaloos often use as one of their slogans. It was also what Carrillo drew in blood on one of the phrases he drew in blood on the hood of a car in Northern California after he'd been shot by the cops and when he was right before he was detained. Some photographs of those scrawlings were surfaced in his complaint in his charging papers. It's a wild story, man.
Let's go over that then. So let's kind of rebuild the story then, because we've gone off track a bit. So Carrillo meets Hunter on a Boogaloo Facebook group, basically. They both agree, like, yeah, let's meet up very quickly. And they're rolling about with arms. What happened?
Not Hunter. So Carrillo met up. He was communicating with another guy named, I believe, Robert Justice on a Boogaloo Facebook group.
Yes. Sorry.
And there are a lot of names around here. And, they said, oh, look, the protests are on our coast. Let's get it going. We got to do something now. So they meet up, and according to Justice, and Justice, by the way, gave all this information voluntarily to the FBI. He claims that they met up at a public transit station a little bit south of Oakland. Gets into this white van, this kind of like Econoline van with a sliding door, 1990s issue, and 1990s vintage. And he shows up, and Carrillo hands him a vest, bulletproof vest, and then he shows him a couple guns. He's like, "Hey, man, let's go boog." Justice claims that he denied holding the gun, but he then proceeded to go with, and claims he was threatened by Carrillo. Also, later on, that came out in his own case, because he's charged too. But they drive to downtown Oakland. They drive around the protests. There's, Oakland's protests have been, over the years, it's been a place where things really do pop off. I've seen it firsthand many times, like dozens of times during the Oscar Grant movement, Occupy Oakland, the first Black Lives Matter cycle. Things do really just, it gets lit out there pretty quick. So they drive around downtown Oakland, do a couple recons. Justice gets out of the car at one point and takes the license plate off the back of the van. So he's either doing that under duress or he's cooperating. Carrillo, there's video of that apparently, and Carrillo did not have a gun to his head when he took the license plates off the car. So we'll see how willing a participant he was in all this. But then they drive by the downtown courthouse, right? They pass by it they go around the block. They pass by it again. They slow down. Car slows down, and the van door pops open, and Carrillo sprays the guard post up with this modified rifle, this fully automatic rifle that he's created with help of this portable wall hanger. And then they drive off, and that for like a week and change, they're at large. There's a manhunt going on throughout Northern California. At the time, it's really important to remember this, the Trump administration claimed that Black Lives Matter demonstrators had attacked the federal courthouse, and that that was part of his justification for why the National Guard needed to be sent in. Democratic cities needed to crack down on these protesters who were pushing back against police brutality and police murder. And
right, but it was this Boogaloo guy.
Exactly. Yeah, they used the incident as cover to carry out their own goals. And that, by the way, is something that has come out in a lot of the court cases that have been filed against the Boogaloo boys, that they did see the BLM protests as a very significant opportunity to recruit, to get other people to rally to their cause, and also to act too, because you have to remember that a lot of these groups did really start gaining steam during the spring, during the pandemic lockdowns, right? And that's something that it's not uniform, but that's when the idea about preparing for the impending Boogaloo, the second Civil War, pushing back against government tyranny, really gained a lot of currency. You saw a lot of armed protesters showing up at state houses, particularly the Michigan State House. And yeah, it was kind of a cultural strain that just exploded at that point in time. So then they split up. Carrillo goes into hiding out in Santa Cruz in this town called Ben Lomond, where he's camped out. He's from out there, and he gets couple cops come across his van. They try and California Highway Patrol and the Santa Cruz sheriffs try and roll up on him. He's laying in wait for them in an ambush. Throws a couple improvised homemade grenades at them. Injures a couple of the cops. Sprays them up with that rifle again. Kills this sergeant, I think he was a sergeant, the sheriff's deputy, and wounds a couple more. Runs away. He's been hit. He's wounded. He's bleeding. He tries to carjack one person. Is unsuccessful. He tries to carjack somebody else. The person turns out to be a former wrestler, former collegiate or high school wrestler, and bats the gun away and ends up detaining him, pinning him down to the ground and detaining him till the cops can arrive. And in the middle, while all this is happening, Carrillo's screaming out these slogans, I stop the duopoly, we got to stop tyranny, all this random shit that is it's showing how deeply indoctrinated, or how deeply he believes in the ideology that he's been immersing himself in all these months or years or however long he was in that lane. So his case was really an eye-opener. It completely changed the narrative about violence at protests and really got a lot of law enforcement in this country and kind of opened their eyes to, hey, look, maybe this is actually the threat here. Maybe the threat is not going to come from protesters carrying guns in here and shooting cops because they're angry about, us killing black folks. It's maybe there's an actual movement here that is piggybacking on all this and using it to kind of put the skills and the tools that they've been developing into action.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really struck me was how cold Carrillo was. He's kind of, I don't know. He's very from the piece you did for us. He was really about it. Do you know what I mean? For want of a better expression, he really wanted to do this.
Totally committed. He'd planned it. He'd geared up, and everything about the guy's life, the militia training, the prep he did for this, the way he, according to Justice, the statement that he gave to the Bureau, the way that he was really, really, really driving to do that. There was no way he was going to be deterred from or dissuaded from carrying out an act of violence there. And he was totally committed to it. And to think that even a week and a half later that he was sitting there, he probably fashioned those grenades in between, or he prepped himself for an ambush when the cops came for him. He knew what was going to happen, and he knew what he was going to do.
Yeah, and completely fucked it up. What happened? What happened since then? Since the piece has been published at Popular Front, you've seen some more stuff, right? I don't know how it works over there, but some court documents have been opened up or whatever the fuck. What's happened?
Yeah, well, what has happened since the initial, since Carrillo's arrest and his charging and the initial hearings in the Santa Cruz case and then the federal case, is that the feds have really opened up before the election. I think they had shifted their focus a little bit away from the siege groups, at least the right-wing domestic terrorism folks, the folks who work counterterrorism, or whatever our version of that is. They'd shifted away from the siege groups and more towards the Boogaloos, and we're saying, look, these are the guys who are actually carrying. They're the ones who are acting. They're not the ones who are talking and prepping. They're the ones who are going out there and carrying out acts of violence. So they shifted their focus towards those groups, and because of, this is, again, where Facebook comes into it. Facebook is very law enforcement friendly. Law enforcement has a back end for it. Facebook keeps a tremendous amount of stuff, and they have years and years, well over a decade now, of working with the cops and providing them information. So the Bureau was able to get these treasure troves of just big histories of chats and communications. And once you have, say, for instance, you have somebody's Facebook account, the odds are that they have it on their phone at this point. So then you have the mobile number, and you can then write a Title III affidavit and get a wiretap and get the full take on the text messages, call history, whatever else you're able to get through a Title III these days, which is quite extensive considering how much people have on their phones. And that's where, it's not really 100% confirmed, but from what I'm seeing in terms of the timing of the Hunter indictment in Minnesota, and then the other one in West Virginia for Timothy John Watson, it looks like they got to these guys through Carrillo, because he was so active and he'd really branched out and networked among the Boogs. And he was typically, when you see in any group that is given towards, in any group, you'll see one or two people. You'll see a lot of people who talk about violence, and then you'll see one or two people who really are the drivers of it, right? And it appears that Carrillo was, and you'll see this amongst amongst police departments. You'll see this in other domestic terrorism contexts. Sam Woodward, for example, the Atomwaffen member who killed Blaise Bernstein, he was a perfect example of this. And yeah, to me, it looks like Carrillo was that guy in the Boog. He was kind of the person around. He was a person because of how active he was and how ardent he was in his beliefs. People gravitated towards him, and he gravitated towards the other folks who were willing to go out there and act. And there were quite a few people at that point in time. This is the remarkable thing about that movement, who in the spring and early summer were 100% committed, and they were willing to act, and they did.
Right. And what is Hunter, this Hunter guy, what is he actually charged with?
So Hunter, the one in Minnesota, he is charged with interstate travel to incite a riot. And I believe there might be a little bit of a looting charge. There could be other charges that get fired against him, but the travel, it's basically an anti-riot act charge, which is similar to the charge the feds are using against Robert Rundo, who's the founder of the Rise Above movement. They used against the Rise Above movement, the street fighting Nazis from Southern California. And it's a pretty flexible charge. I don't believe they've charged him with weapons violations because they were his own weapons. And they might load up illegal use of firearm if they're able to confirm that he fired those shots. But right now, it looks like the anti-riot act is the charge.
Right, and Carrillo's accomplice, what's he looking at?
Carrillo's accomplice is looking at similar charges to Carrillo. Not quite as severe, but he's being charged with, aiding and abetting, essentially. Like Carrillo himself, he's got the double murder charge, like state court and then federal court. What's actually interesting about Carrillo is that they're going for the death penalty. The feds are going for the death penalty on him, which makes it a higher bar of evidence. It makes the proceedings, I believe his attorney is a federal defender, and it really makes the proceedings, it's a very high risk. But yeah, Justice is charged with aiding and abetting for, he's got basically a first-degree murder charge on top of him because of the way that the murder counts work. So he has every incentive in the world to cooperate, given that he's apparently not the person that fired the shots.
Yeah. And so what, Carrillo killed, one was a cop and one was a security officer or something? Yeah,
so the first person Carrillo murdered, allegedly, and he probably did it, was a federal court protective officer. So in the United States, there's a specific division, there's a specific service, law enforcement service, that guards the federal courthouses and associated facilities. The second person was a deputy from the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department. Santa Cruz is a coastal county a little bit south of San Francisco, 2 counties south of San Francisco on the Central Coast, a beautiful place, very forested. Ironically, the heavily forested, gorgeous country, but ironically, the area that Carrillo's house was in was hit incredibly hard by wildfires, just weeks later, not weeks later, but months later in August, when the real bad fires hit. So, yeah, I mean, they're staring at some serious time, all these guys.
Right, and I mean, this is a kind of dumb question, but I want to kind of get what you think about it, like how you would explain it. Why did Carrillo do this? Why did he go out and kill these cops?
I wish I had I don't have a definitive answer to that. I think that based on his ideology and based on my reading of the rest of the complaints and what I've seen from other folks in the Boog, and also similar actors from other far-right organizations that you and I have both worked on for a long time, these people believe in a domino effect. They want to carry out an act that will inspire others to follow in their wake. It's not dissimilar from how violent extremists work across the spectrum, but he did believe that, from my understanding, is that Carrillo sought to inspire people to push back against law enforcement in a more radical way than they've been doing to date. The same thing with Hunter. Like, they sought to serve as, they wanted to be the accelerant on the fires that were the protests and this raging national anger at George Floyd's murder.
Yeah, do you know what? It's such a fascinating kind of convergence of ideas, the Boogaloo movement, just for me looking at it from abroad, because it's kind of funny. You got all the kind of, I don't know what you want to call them, like radical liberals or the anarchists or the communists, whoever was out protesting. All the ACABs were out there. All cops are bastards, and then ironically, Boogaloos who are also ACABs, in that sense, those were the guys that actually did the cop killing. Not the left-wingers, it was the right-wing libertarians. It's just fascinating to me how this happened,
Yeah, I mean, there are certain ideas that transcend the political spectrum, that span it. And dislike of authority is certainly something that, people on the far right and people on the far left share, because sooner or later, the weight of the state's going to come down on you if you're trying to push back on it. Either if you're pushing back on it for a gun-loving paradise, if you're pushing it back on it you're pushing against it to try and create like a version of Rojava or anarcho-syndicalist country or series of independent mutually assisting cities and things like that. The state will push back on you and will try and crush you. So that it just depends on which group is able, willing, and capable of carrying out a catastrophic act of violence. Across the U.S., I mean, the reality is that in the recent past, actually past 3-4 decades, like, you'd have to go back a long, long way, maybe to the Weathermen, to find a case of serious lethal left-wing violence, far left violence in the U.S., and the far right is just all over it, man. Like, that's the way that things go here, because they're the people who like guns, who obsess about guns, who train with them, who train with weapons, who train with explosives. There's a large, as exemplified by Mr. Carrillo, there's a large cachet of for this ideology in the military and amongst veterans. And it's not universal, and there are a ton of left-wing veterans out there too, but the folks who go balls to the wall and put the foot on the, mash the gas pedal, tend to be like Carrillo.
And what's the response in the Boogaloo community? Is Carrillo seen as like a martyr for their movement? Is he like a hero for them, or what? Like, honestly, I've been looking and I've not really seen them say much about him. I don't know if you have.
They're not talking about him, from what I can say. They're not talking about him publicly, from what I can.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it would make you a target, right? Because Carrillo was he was well known. These indictments make clear that this guy was not nobody. Like, from a couple people that I know, like, a bunch of servers went dead after he did what he did, and after his identity came out. And it's not to say that a bunch of the movement is tamped down, but he has not been claimed in the same way that Duncan Lemp was. And I think that's because any group and any individual knows that if they claim him, then they're putting a bullseye on their forehead.
Yeah, how seriously are law enforcement taking the Boogaloo movement in America?
Extremely. Yeah, extremely. I mean, the amount of, from the information that I have, from the reporting that I do, from the sources that I keep, they were a red ball. They were the red ball target for the past 5 months, in the same way that Adam Waffen Division was maybe about a year and a half ago.
Where do you think the Boogaloo movement is going to go from here then? Do you think it will fizzle out or what?
I mean, I looked at it in terms of a continuum between like the 3 percenters and a lot of the militias that came up years and years and years back. This is kind of a cultural strain in the U.S. That just takes different forms and has different iterations depending on the generation, depending on the cultural context, depending on the broader culture, I don't think it goes away anytime soon. And the fact that, as you're working on in this project of yours, like the fact that it's getting so much easier to create your own weapon, to create a really, really lethal weapon off the legal market, that's a big accelerant for this sort of culture, I think. Like the fact that you're able to just do this and get around regulations, and that you'll see, people who are into this culture look at gun regulations as tyranny of the state, right? That's a huge part of Second Amendment culture. That's an old idea that well predates the Boogaloo. So yeah, I think that there's a very good chance that maybe not in this iteration, maybe in a different format, but it's going to continue. I don't think this goes away anytime soon. There's a lot of cat's kind of out of the bag with it. And frankly, like taking the life of a couple, firing on cops, like that's, I don't know enough about what their what the adherents to this ideology and what the Boogs are saying in their own closed circles, but Carrillo, Hunter, Watson, their names are not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, man. Ali, is there anything else you want to say about these Boogaloo cop killers?
I think that I'm very loath to, this is a group where because of how amorphous and how broad, I guess the best way to describe their ideology is kind of broad tent. I'm really loath to say that they are not affiliated with one political party or the other, but I know that in the transition period now between one presidential administration and the other, there's a lot of, it's kind of a very tendentious moment. It's a very, very fragile moment. And that, I don't know if that's the sort of thing that people are looking to seize on and kind of shake the tree a little bit and cause further destabilization. It's something that I know has been talked about a lot, especially among folks who watch the right wing, who watch the American extremist movements, and it's something the serious researchers I'm talking about, not the people who are in it for the nonprofits and the media attention and the institutional support. It's a bit of a wild time here.
Biden, he wants to regulate firearms more, right? What does he want to do?
Biden wants to regulate firearms. I don't have an idea about a specific policy proposal, but after the Newtown shootings and after a series of these horrible massacres, mass shootings that we've had in the U.S., he's been very outspoken about wanting to implement more gun control. So I don't think he's going to be a fan of these groups. He's also Biden. Since Charlottesville in 2017, Biden has really focused in on right-wing extremism. He said that is what he claims propelled him to decide to run for president again, successfully this time. And it's going to be interesting to see how his administration shapes up their counter-extremism and domestic terrorism approach. I think it's going to be far more robust than has been done beforehand. But again, you can only use law enforcement to a certain degree, right? There has to be de-radicalization is a much deeper process. And I think that's where the challenge lies.
Yeah, man, definitely. I agree. Ali, where can people find you and get a hold of you and follow this important work that you're doing? I'm an independent journalist. The best public-facing way to get in touch with me is on Twitter. My handle is A Winston. I'm out there. There's an email address up there. It's a Proton Mail, ali.winston@protonmail.com. But yeah, I'm out here. AWINSTON, no E on the end, right?
Yep, not Ray Winstone. Ali like Muhammad, Winston like the cigarette.
All right, mate. Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
That was journalist Ali Winston talking about the attack by two Boogaloo boys this year in the US. Whenever I talk about this situation with the Boogaloo cop killers, people say, no, they weren't Boogaloos. Yes, they were. You just heard it. They were. If you go to popularfront.co/articles, you'll see an article that Ali wrote about all of this in more detail as well. Boogaloo cop killer. Check it out. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us on the Patreon. That is how we make our money. That is how we keep going. And you get a load of benefits as well. You get lots for your money. It's not us begging, saying, please give us money. It's us saying, hey, subscribe and you get all this cool shit. Patreon.com/popularfront. Check us out there. This episode is sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Go say hello to my mate Frank. If he's there, he will give you a nice discount if you tell him you came there because of Popular Front. He will give you a 99.9% discount, and you can quote me and tell him I said that. Nah, don't do that. Well, you can if you want. Who gives a fuck? This episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. Anyway, the episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. Get prints at propagandopolis.com. That's propagandopolis.com. Enter the code PopularFront10. You get 10% off. The episode is also sponsored by Black Triangle, an independent company selling self-defense tools. Check them out at blktriangle.com. Also, like I said, if you want to get all the extra stuff, subscribe to us at patreon.com/popularfront. If you don't like Patreon, you can go to our where can you go? Fuck my life. popularfront.co/support. You can donate Bitcoin. You can send us money via PayPal, all of that, if that's what you want to do. Also, get our merchandise at popularfront.shop. Check us out there. Go to our youtube.com/popularfront. Subscribe. The 3D printed guns in Western Europe, a very, very illegal and spicy documentary, is coming out in November. There's a little short 30-second teaser on my Twitter if you want to see that, at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Yeah. Instagram at popular.front. Twitter at popularfrontco. Thank you to the following people on Patreon: Larson8669, Nadim El Azmar, Bjorn Kirsten, Michael O'Connor, Hapet Yagia Zayan, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Bastian Gamillo Rittmeyer, Ian Froese, James Cully, Michael Akakan, Ethan Reyes, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Alex Northrop, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Hugo Newski, Mike Barone, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, C. Jackson Trey Nance, Charlie, Amy Rupert, Rubicon, Mink, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al Rashid, Maxwell Burke, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Ari from the Discord, Young Wasabi, Sarushe Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, Scartoon Music, Sebastian from the Discord, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarek, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Q-Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, Moritz Zumbal, Kay Hardy Roberts, and Joanne Stocker. Thank you all very much. Without you, this would not be moving ahead as fast as it is. If you want to support us, again, patreon.com/popularfront. Music in this episode, the intro is by Home, and the outro is always by my mate Sam Black. Check his music out at samblackpf.com.